Amazing. Okay, thank you. I think we'll still continue to let people in, but I think we'll get started. So hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm just going to start with a very quick introduction of HDK. So we are a digital agency. We provide website design and marketing services to arts and cultural organisations like yourselves and clients such as people like Arts Council England, Alexandra Palace, National Theatre Scotland, and a couple of organisations who are joining us today, including Rambert Dance and Music Managers Forum. I am Phoebe. I'm HDK's Client Relationship Manager. I am a white woman in her early 30s. I like to say emphasis on the early. I have blonde hair that's tied up today with blue eyes, and I'm wearing a grey top, a red scarf, and a gold necklace. And my pronouns are she, her. Today I'm joined by my colleague Meg, who I'll hand over to introduce herself.
Hi everyone, thank you Phoebe. I am Meg. I am previously marketing manager at HDK and I'm moving over into an accounts role. I am a white woman in her 20s. I've got black hair that I've straightened today. I've got some little gold hoop earrings in and a bluish jumper on. I'm also multitasking today, letting people in, so sorry if I get a bit distracted. My pronouns are she, her.
Wonderful, thank you, Meg. And we are very excited to be joined today by 6 wonderful guest speakers from across the arts, culture and heritage sectors. And we're going to be having a panel discussion on the topic of ethics in social media and social media responsibility. So to structure this discussion, we're going to be asking them 3 key questions so that we can hear their insights and experiences directly. And then after each question, we're going to open up to you so that if you have any questions or insights to share, then you can do so. After that, we will share a quick survey for you to give us some feedback on the session today. And then we'll share some information about more of HDK's webinars. We do a free webinar every month and we have the full programme for 2024 live on our website, so we'll make sure to share that with you at the end. If you'd like to post on social media about today's session, please do so. We are using the hashtag HDK webinar, which is on the screen now. So with that housekeeping done, it's my pleasure to introduce you to our panel today. So firstly, I will hand over to Jo Taylor to introduce herself. Oh, we need to unmute you. Sorry, we've muted everybody on entry, which is confusing.
I've done. Am I speaking?
Yes. Yeah, all good.
Thank you, Phoebe. Thank you, Meg. Hi, everybody. A massive pleasure to be here. My name is Jo Taylor. I am a white woman in my very early 50s. I will emphasise also, with shoulder length, very dark brown hair, which reminds me I need a haircut. I'm wearing a black top and I have a yellow lanyard bearing the branding of Rambert, which is the company I am director of audiences of. For now, I am just making a note. There will be a job advert. I think it'll be in the link later on. I'm moving on from this absolutely brilliant job in April. And so I encourage everyone to take a look and consider applying for it. It's a great place to work.
Yes, and they are an absolutely wonderful team because we've had the lovely opportunity of working with them on a couple of projects. So yeah, highly recommend. Next, we have Haydn. So please introduce yourself, Haydn.
Hi, everybody. I'm Haydn Corrodus. I used to be a digital culture network. Some of the old teammates are in the chat. Good to see. I've been working with an arts culture organisation for the last 6 or 7 years now. I'm now a full-time consultant. One of my clients actually does have a new role up for grabs as well. So there's a digital lead role at Pippa. So if anybody's interested in that as well, that'll be in the chat later on as well.
Thank you so much, Haydn. Now, I'll hand over to you to introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm Nell Burnham. I'm the Senior Social Media Manager for the Tate Art Galleries. I've been with Tate for about 8 years now in various roles on the social team. I use she, her pronouns. Visual description, I'm a white woman in her early 30s also. Brunette, shoulder-length hair, half up today, and the most boring white t-shirt that I could find in my closet. So nothing too exciting to describe. Thank you, Phoebe and Meg.
Thank you very much. And Sally, I'll hand over to you.
Hello everyone, I'm Sally Pentecost. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the Communications and Events Officer at the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland. Don't worry if you've never heard of it. We're a heritage charity based in Edinburgh, and I do comms for the Society 2 days a week and also for one of their projects 3 days a week, which is called Dig It, which is unsurprisingly all about promoting Scottish archaeology to the public. And I'm also one of the coordinators of the Scottish Heritage Social Media Group, or SHSMGA, we really need a better acronym, which encourages social media learning, knowledge exchange, and cross-promotion within Scotland's cultural heritage sectors. And we run knowledge sharing webinars very similar to HDK. So I think Meg's going to put a link to that in the chat later. As for my description, I'm a white woman in my late 20s. I've got curly, shoulder-length brown hair, glasses, and I'm wearing a jazzy jumper today, which is blue, purple, and pink.
Thank you. Very jazzy. That was the perfect word. Amazing. Thank you both. And finally, our last two speakers, I'll hand over to Kwame to introduce himself.
Hi, my name's Kwame Kwaten. I am the MD of Ferocious Talent. I'm also very proudly the Vice Chair of the MMF, an organisation that looks after the interest, I guess, of 1,500 now music managers across the UK. I'm also a MOBO trustee, a Brit trustee, and a point blank, what I do, I'm a head of A&R. I've been told that I'm a multi-hyphenate by Phoebe, and I'm a bald black man with a grey salt and pepper beard, and I'm wearing a De-Influence t-shirt here, which is black with the image of the gorgeous singer Sarah on it, and we were a band in the 90s, and that is how I first got into the music business. Perfectly rounded. That is the end of that.
Thank you very much. And then finally, we have Joe Burnham. We have two Joes today, so I'm going to be calling them Joe Taylor and Joe Burnham. But yeah, Joe Burnham, I'll hand over to you for your introduction.
Hi everyone, I'm Joe Burnham, or Jocelyn Burnham. I use she, her pronouns. I have green and blue eyes because I'm an alien. And visual description, I have my hair tied back in a bit of a messy bun. I'm a white femme presenting person, very much in her exact mid-30s. And I'm wearing a black t-shirt with a moon necklace. I'm currently the marketing campaigns manager of Brighton Dome and Brighton Festival. And more recently, I've become sort of a freelance AI trainer and playfulness coach in a way for getting to grips with what on earth is happening with all the AI tools and concepts that are coming out. And I use my website, aiforculture.com, and sort of do materials and fun bits and pieces for how we deal with robots. Previously, I've held roles at Hadler's Wells Theatre, at Music Theatre Wales, and most recently I was the communications manager for Unboxed Creativity in the UK. So I've had different bits and pieces in the theatre arts space, and yeah, really happy to be here today with all of you. Looking forward to this.
Amazing. Thank you, Joe, and thank you, everybody. Yeah, we're so thrilled to be joined by such brilliant speakers, all doing very different, very exciting things across our very broad sector. So we can't wait to hear their insights. So without further ado, we are going to make a start on our panel discussion. So the first discussion point that we are going to explore is, what does it mean to be responsible on social media in the arts, culture, and heritage landscape? Can we do social media responsibly? So, working with lots of different arts and cultural organisations, we are aware that so many marketing teams and digital teams are stretched in terms of time and resources, and stressed about how to how to get to everything on their list. And I think stopping and having a conversation about, you know, is our activity aligning with our organizational values, and is what we're doing as responsible as it could be, isn't always a conversation that we get to have, but it's such an important one. So that's why we were really keen to start that conversation today with our panel. So I wonder if Jo Taylor, if you'd be happy to start us off with sharing your insights on this.
Sure, we're very happy to. I forgot to mention the pronouns I use are she, her, so to fill in that gap. So yeah, this was actually a question. There's so many ways I could have answered this, but it was a question I was asked by our Board of Trustees more than 2 years ago in a bit of a curveball in the middle of a board meeting. They seemed to be about to suggest we stopped using Meta, which obviously threw me into slight panic. And I offered to go away and have a think about this. And I decided to write a Rambert social media manifesto to reassure the board. But I was actually really glad they made me think about it. So my aim was to set out Rambert's commitment to using social media platforms in a positive and responsible way. And for those people that know me well, they may not be surprised that for me it came back to brand, but let me explain why. Our brand at Rambert is about empowering, inspiring, and motivating others towards positive change. So that's central to everything we think about whenever we're doing anything or communicating. And we have to recognise that these platforms can be problematic if they're used in an irresponsible or unhealthy manner. But I did believe, and I do believe, that our brand could make a positive contribution in these environments. And I needed to set out how we were going to do that. So I thought about the threats that the board hadn't named, but were referring to. And I felt that they fell broadly into three potential harms. So I took those three areas and just examined them a little bit in relation to our brand. And you may think there's things I haven't covered, and I'm obviously going to have to be very light touch in this conversation so as I don't take up the whole session. But for each, I took a perspective on how we could embody our brand to not only avoid exacerbating the problem, but to actually engage as a force for good. So very briefly, the three broad harms that I named were unrealistic standards, feeds that promote unrealistic beauty and lifestyle standards, that constant comparison of ourselves and our lives leading to self-doubt, low confidence, low self-esteem, etc. That's probably the most obvious one initially. I then thought about FOMO, the social anxiety that comes from the belief that something interesting is always happening with someone else, without you, somewhere else, that everyone else's lives are more fulfilling and more fun. And the third one was the risk of addiction and inaction that could be caused by that endless feed in your hand that takes up our time. It can be unhealthy from both a physical and a psychological perspective, and the concern that it means people are less inclined to engage in real life experiences. So for each of these, I considered how our brand actually responded to those, and I found it quite easy. And I think you'll all find, if you do the same exercise, you'll all find it answers itself. I won't go into all the detail, but for example, if other brands are promoting impossible standards, we must be sure to show, while our dancers, and they do, you know, they do look amazing and they do perform superhuman physical feats, they must be shown very much as real humans, which is actually central to our brand anyway. We don't represent our artists as unobtainable, as ethereal, as above you. We make sure they're always extending a provocation to you, to have fun, to get involved, to be invited, to show up. And we show our diverse and relatable company of dancers and all the human beings we work with. We give them voice, we show behind the scenes, we show inside the studio. But the key here is that we're always inspiring you, the viewer, the recipient, to believe in yourself and to believe in your own capabilities. And so on. And then I looked at the FOMO, and I thought, well, at Rambert, we are sure that our content, or we must be sure our content is inspiring action and participation in the real world beyond social media. So our strapline is actually, it's your move. And we work hard to often urge people to show up, to move the world, to participate. So I won't go through all of them. I hope that this is all about our brand specifically, but I hope that gives you enough to illustrate the point. So yes, I think you can. If you're clear about what your brand personality is, your brand promise is, your purpose in the world, and that is responsible and a force for good, then yes, absolutely you can.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. I think it's really interesting to approach it from the brand perspective because, you know, just from hearing you say that, I think, and reflecting on, you know, how Rambert comes across on social media, and, you know, even in the productions themselves, I think that really does come through. So it's really interesting to kind of observe what that kind of like top-down approach to brand and building a manifesto can do to how you present yourself, which is amazing. Nell, I'm interested to hear your thoughts. You know, you work with a very recognizable brand in Tate, so it'd be great to hear some of your insights as well.
Sure. Yeah. Firstly, just thanks, Joe. That was amazing. And I'm definitely going to steal the idea of a manifesto. I think that's a brilliant way to position it.
I'm happy to share it with anyone who wants it, by the way.
Yes, please.
We don't copy it because it's about our brand, but it'll show you what I did.
Yeah, that sounds great. And I think almost we've taken a different route to get to maybe a similar area, which is what can Tate offer on social media channels? How is that different? And how can that be a positive contribution? And the 3 words we've kind of come up with that we're always trying to work towards are rest, reflect, reset. So obviously social media feeds, we all know, can be full of toxicity from lots of directions for lots of reasons. And I think Tate can be quite uniquely placed to maybe interrupt that a little bit and offer a moment of reflection and maybe perspective to just add a bit of positivity to that timeline, I think. And Tate's mission, you know, there's the belief that art is a universal human right. So I take my role quite seriously as the social media manager. How can I take our collection of 80,000 artworks and really make those accessible and offer opportunities for people to genuinely create connection with those artworks? We've built up a social media following of 12.5 million across the different channels. Many of those are not based in the UK. Many of those do not have English as their first language. So I'm constantly thinking about how can we make this artwork relevant? How can we really speak to people and create opportunities for genuine engagement? So that's definitely part of what we're thinking about. Definitely for us as well, I think representation is obviously hugely important. If you look at the history of art, obviously that's not always something that you're going to see everyone represented. So we really focus to make sure that our feeds represent the communities we're serving. I run the @Tate accounts, which are representing Tate Modern and Tate Brighton, which are both based in London. So we make sure that our feeds represent the demographics of London, and we measure that, and we make sure we're hitting those targets month on month with no exceptions. And that's really important to us. Similarly, we often try to find kind of community leaders who are already having interesting conversations that matter to different communities and offer them a platform rather than go to people and say, it's Women's History Month, can you talk about this? Or it's South Asian Heritage Month, can you talk about this? Instead, we go to people, see the conversations that people are having that matter and shape it together rather than kind of go in with a hard brief. I think that's been a huge learning curve for us and just created way more authentic content that actually feels like it matters and is doing something, rather than just lip service, which I really think is key. I also just wanted to bring up the responsibility I feel for my team, and what we witness and experience being social media managers and the emotional fatigue that can come with that. So for us, it's just really important to take breaks, to check in with each other, to make sure we're kind of keeping that distance of perspective, that this is our job, it's not us who we are, and kind of finding a way to keep that separate, because otherwise I think morale can really dip. I think there's some quite unique challenges when it's your job to log on and sometimes read, you know, quite toxic things. So just to flag that as well, I think it's really important. I also think, you know, with bigger brands, you get the opportunity to work directly with these platforms. Sometimes we've had collaborations with TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and that also gives you a unique position to hold those platforms accountable and to ask difficult questions and to say, well, what are you doing about this? And I saw a news story about this. You know, people internally are worried about it. What's the response? And to just ask the questions so that you thoroughly understand the implications of you know how you're working with those organizations, and just give them a reason to go back to their boss and say, just so you know, this brand, we're worried about that, you know, put a bit of pressure on, I think is also a way that I try to use my time. Another maybe slightly more boring one, but definitely a big aspect of my job is educating staff on how to use social media responsibly. Obviously, it's becoming more common for members of staff to have, in their bio what they do for work. So kind of distinguishing between what a professional versus a personal account is, how, if you post something that could be screen grabbed and kept so it lives forever, even if you delete it, and really just making sure people are armed with the information to protect themselves. And to still engage meaningfully with online conversation and dialogue, but just make sure that they're aware of the implications of that kind of activity, obviously without wanting to shut anyone down or police anyone. That's not what I'm interested in doing. So those are kind of a few of the areas I really try to focus on. And similarly, I think obviously just keeping an eye on context is so important on social media because things move so quickly. So it might be what's in the news, what Netflix has just released, or even like what time of year it is, lands the same post will land differently depending on how people are feeling because of lots of reasons. And just always putting it through the final filter of, is this appropriate for today, or how will this be read today, or how will this maybe make people feel? We did a really useful exercise with the team where we thought about the kind of words that come up if we're thinking about summer, and it was words like energy and excitement and party and socializing. And then we thought about words that might come up around Christmas time, and people were saying nostalgia, stress, comfort. Like there were some really emotive words there, and we said, okay, well actually, if we publish the same artwork in those two periods, how are they going to be felt differently, and what context might they be seen through? So I really just think it's constantly keeping an eye on what's going on and trying to keep across how people might be feeling for different reasons, and yeah, just trying to make sure that that's a force for good rather than negative. Thank you.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you. It's so, I mean, just starting this conversation, it makes you realize just how much consideration there is because, not only are you having to be responsive and have a responsibility to be responsive to your audience's needs. And I think that's a really interesting take of like listening to your audience and understanding what they need at that moment in time, but also looking internally of like, okay, what do our team need and what can we do to support them? And something that I think is really brilliant about Tate, not just saying it because you're here, is that, Tate is a globally recognizable brand. And I think sometimes brands of that scale can feel quite like unreachable or kind of overly polished. And I think there really is that like human touch and human feel that comes across on the social platforms. So I think that's a really interesting case study of like how to do that. So thank you very much, Nell. Haydn, obviously with your work, you work with lots of brands across the sector. So it'd be great to kind of hear your insights on how kind of conversations you've had about this with them.
Don't know if I can really add much to the brilliant work already been and all the things already been said, but fundamentally for me, there's only really 4 real points that if you're at an organization that you really need to consider when you're thinking about how to do social responsibility. So it's, are you aligning, adhering to what your own ethos is, what your own ideas are as an organization? Are you making culture accessible? When I say this now, there's one thing to say you're making culture accessible, and there's another thing to actually knowing that the people who might not be able to see your content every day, or might not be able to walk into your venue every day, or might even feel intimidated in your spaces, are actually present and actually have a voice or actually feel seen. So really taking into consideration what you do and how you do that. So similar to what Nell said, you're getting people who are actually in these conversations, who are actually leaders in these communities, and not trying to force feed your narrative and your opinion on them, but actually giving them a space to articulate themselves and show up in a space to be their authentic self. Then are we using it to be creative storytellers or to sell products? I think when you understand the distinction between the two, it helps you understand how you're going to build out your strategy. So if you're saying we want to tell our story, be via dance, via art, via theatre, be it whatever that may look like, it's easier for you to then determine how you create content and how you get across to audiences in a way that they will enjoy. So are you performing, are you creating content that is educational? Is it informative? Is it edutainment? Is it funny? Is it whatever that is for you? And then finally, are we thinking not just about our future, not about our current audiences, but our future audiences? So what I mean by that is we have especially I find within the arts, there's a kind of pushback against anything that is new or shiny. There's a kind of a reserve against getting involved or doing things or taking a risk that might not be seen as a traditional way of communicating with people. And this, to me, is a big problem. And the reason being is that at one stage, everybody was young. At one stage, the people who we're trying to attract or the new audiences are going to come from a younger generation. That's always going to be the case. There's always going to be that kind of scale where people move on. And so making sure we're going to the places where new audiences are, and where new audiences can connect and where people can feel seen is to me is really, really important. This doesn't necessarily mean that you have to jump on every single new TikTok trend or jump on every single new social media platform, but it's have an understanding of why people are going there, why are communities gathering in this way, why are cultural moments happening in places that we're not seeing. And for me, I think those are the most important things to really consider when you're thinking about how to be responsible in social media.
Amazing, thank you. Yeah, I think what it seems like, obviously so much of it comes down to brand, but also so much of it is also about your audiences and your communities that you're serving, and engaging with them in a way that's, you know, not just saying, you know, you're a priority for us, we care about you, we want you to engage in our work, but like actually you doing the engagement with them first and kind of meeting them where they're at and kind of welcoming them into your organization. I think that's really important as well. So
Just
thank
one
you.
more thing to that. It's not just the online thing. There has to be in the real world, in real life. There's
Yeah.
a thing where we do kind of just showcase certain things online and pretend that that's how things are really operating in the real world. There needs to be that synergy between both. Sorry.
100%. Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you. It is important that there's the in-person experience reflects the online experience, and those teams are talking as well. So 100%. Okay, brilliant. So I would love to hear from Sally next. I attended a talk by Sally at the AMA conference, and Sally was talking about some really exciting work that they've been doing in this area. So yeah, over to you, Sally.
Thanks, Phoebe. Like my co-panelists, I don't want to go over like stuff that they've already said, which is all very true and is what we're talking about as well, discussing whether we should pull away from social media, and we're concerned about the effect it has on our audiences and staff for various reasons. And we have wondered in recent years whether the negative effects on staff and audiences outweigh the benefits. However, we also know that if everyone, including us arts and heritage organisations, was to leave the major social media platforms and those platforms diminish or even disappear as a result, how do folks without existing resources connect and mobilise in society? How do we all stop our feeds becoming echo chambers of people and organisations with experiences and approaches just like our own? We also know that in order to meet our organisational visions, so for the society, that's Scotland's past is for everyone to research, share, enjoy and protect at home and abroad. And for the Dig It project specifically, that's a world where everyone benefits from archaeology. We need to meet people where they are. Something that I'm super aware of working with Dig It specifically over the last 5 years or so is that the archaeology sector has spent decades or even centuries really making folks from the global majority, queer people, disabled people feel excluded from archaeology. And as for the dozens of authors, artists, students, consultants who we've worked with over the years and who've made our work better and more inclusive, we found most of them through social media by looking outside of the sector. And I don't feel comfortable abandoning the inroads that we have started to make in finding these people and inviting them to take leading roles in our project and transforming the project. It's also worth noting that the archaeology sector in particular is still very reliant on social media to function, particularly Facebook for advertising community events and sharing updates. So we also need to continue using that to source events to promote and to strengthen relationships within the sector. So those are all the reasons why we've decided not to pull off social media, but how do we stay on and do it responsibly? So there's a couple of things that we've decided to do. One is reduce our output. That is both for our mental health as staff, and we think for our audiences as well. So in October 2022, we began to experiment reducing our social media output from posting organic content every day to posting organic content 3 to 4 times a week. We were responding to changes in the global social media landscape at the time, including a gradual decline in organic reach, with social media operating on a pay-to-play model for brands. We also lean into using social media as a form of activism, for example, mobilizing climate activism, and as a platform for myth-busting content. We discuss topics such as the history of human migration, Scottish ancestry, and ethnic purity. We recognize if we're not there as a respected voice of authority, that some dangerous right-wing myths which use inaccurate narratives of the past can take hold in the zeitgeist using social media. And then at the same time, we're investing time and budget into other forms of communication as well, such as our e-newsletter, which has been going really well. And if anyone wants to hear more about that, please do email me. I'd be happy to talk about it. And then the one last thing that I also wanted to say, which kind of links in to leaning into using social media as a tool for activism and stuff like that, is in our strategies, in our social media strategies for campaigns that we run now. My line manager, who's our communications manager, writes an overview of the situation, key external factors, using the STEEP method, STEEP, which stands for social, technical, economic, ecological, and political. And it is a structured way to account for the trends, forces, and changes outside of the organization and how the campaign will interact with those. So it's studying the macro environment, basically. So we're discussing, what are the key topics for the next election? We're talking about what are the economic challenges people are facing with the cost of living crisis and who is the most affected by that. That there's a sharp jump in concern with the climate crisis. We're talking about how immigration is set to be a crucial issue for voters in key parliamentary seats in the next election. We're talking about how there's a difference between how British nationalism is associated with very anti-immigrant and racist feelings, while Scottish nationalism comes from a very different position. And these are things that you might think, what the hell's that got to do with archaeology? But we are a charity that is engaging with society, with the public, and these are the issues that they care about. And we need to identify both the threats and the opportunities that the macro environment presents to the organization. And I would encourage every organization, charity that works with the public to do that as well. Yeah, sorry, that was a bit rushed at the end.
No, thank you. Yeah, again, some really interesting insights. And I think, it feels like, it could be tempting for some brands to, make a bold stance and say, we're gonna, and with the right reasons, it absolutely makes sense to do so, to, step away from certain platforms. But I think it's also interesting to consider that there is a responsibility there of just because you come off those platforms, it doesn't mean that those conversations aren't happening. And do you want to be silent in those conversations, or do you want to be participating in them? So I think that's a really interesting perspective. So thank you, Sally. Kwame, before we move on to the next discussion point, it'd be great to hear from you, Kwame, about the conversations that you're having in the music space about this.
Ooh. Being responsible on social media. Okay, quite interesting, Haydn. You were saying the whole thing about moving, or just, I guess, having as part of your plan, moving online into real life activity. And a lot of, I guess, what we do in the music industry is we utilize social media to I guess lengthen an artist's career. We use it to reach out. We use it to explain. We use it to defend sometimes. So it's used in many, many different forms. But a lot of, I guess, and many management companies have got different attitudes to it, but our end goal is always as plain as, in the end, making it possible for your artist to actually meet the people that they talk to online. And I know that sounds simple, but making that all happen actually can be quite complicated. But yeah, back to it. Responsibility on social media. Yeah. Artists wise, there's a lot of talk, because the truth is, as we see pretty regularly with many high profile artists and some not so high profile artists, 2 or 3 wrong sentences, irresponsible, say, sentences on social media can change the trajectory of an artist in a huge way. So it's for us, you know, if we look at musical history and we kind of go, okay, well, we started off really with a gramophone, then it went to dance halls, then it went to what? Radio, records, tapes, vinyl, MTV, video. Then we kind of went Napsterish for a bit. Then we went online. Then we learned about streaming. Social media fits somewhere in there, in between Napster and streaming as it starts. And so it's something actually that a lot of, I would say, greybeards have, it's really been a case of adapt or die, as in learn and understand what it can do and can't do for your artists. And also understand, I know somebody was talking earlier on about its impact on mental health. Again, for a lot of the artists we deal with, huge. It's like massive. Some of the artists on our roster, I'll say, you stop looking. You know, if they're an artist that a lot of artists have the tendency to see 100 positive comments and see 1 negative one, and literally the phone call that you will get will only be about the negative comment. So really, really important, you know, them understanding, and also consequences for their actions these days. Let's face it, nowadays, you say the wrong things and or involved in, I don't know, cyberbullying, you know, all of that stuff can end up with what? Social anxiety, depression for people that are on the receiving end. It's stuff that you have to be responsible and think about. So yeah, on the one hand, we've got social media as being a tool for learning, something, an instrument of societal change. I guess pushing a person's skill and skill set in a unique way, being really entertaining. But on the other hand, social isolation, obsessiveness, bullying, it's all stuff that, you know, we've had to really learn and consider and take on board. And it's something that is discussed. I mean, as I said, I'm vice chair of the MMF, and we discuss it regularly. And we look at, I guess, common threads between all of the managers that then become, I guess, new pathways in dealing with it. And why I'm not pinning I'm not nailing to one particular mast here, is because it's ongoing. Everything music business wise, don't forget the music business actually went from being incredibly progressive 60s, 70s, 80s to almost being behind everything in the 90s, etc., and being completely caught out by the digital boom and then having to catch up, you know. So we've gone from being ahead to being completely behind to sort of catching up and making sense of it, which is where I think we still are.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think the particularly interesting points there are that kind of need to constantly evolve. I think it's having a responsibility to do that. And also, looking at it from a slightly different angle in that, the conversations we were having before are about brands and organizations. And of course, as a musical artist, you are representing a brand, but it's ultimately comes back to the individual. And I think, it's harder to log off at night and kind of let that stuff go when it's ultimately directed at you. So I think that's a really interesting conversation as well.
But I also want to point out, by the way, sorry, my pronouns are he, him, but I also wanted to point out that social media has changed the game music industry wise. I don't want to just paint a gloomy picture here. It has changed the game. I've gone from being a manager whose 3/4 of my roster was major label signed to now on my roster, I now have only one act that is major label signed, and even that is a license. So in plain terms, that's literally like a 180 degrees shift in direction. And that has been really caused because self-release is not just a sort of a soft cop-out. Before, self-release was almost seen as, oh, I can't get a major label deal, so I'm going to put my stuff out. Whereas now, for a lot of acts, it's the first go-to. As in, do you know what? I'm going to use social media to communicate with my audience, build up my fan base, build up my brand, as it were, to a point, and then maybe talk to some people. And that's really where we are now. So it's quite exciting at the same time. But
yeah, definitely. Oh, sorry.
Could I ask a question of my fellow panelists?
Go ahead.
Okay?
Sure. Yeah, of course.
It's something that's come up and it's been either named or implied by pretty much everyone. And this is actually around how you support your teams and your staff to navigate this, which Nell talked about. I was listening, I thought everybody's contributions have been amazing, and I'm glad my manifesto fits on one side of A4 because it's now going to have a second side written. But Sally was talking about the things that you're talking about on social, and same with Kwame, the artist you're representing, has the potential to be either pretty complex issues and quite personal. I'm interested in how if there's a training or how you go about supporting your staff to navigate this, because like Kwame's saying, these are individuals when they're artists, but actually, even if you're representing a brand, it feels like it's you. It feels incredibly, one negative comment on the Rambert feed could send Annabelle, my social media coordinator, spiraling. It's horrible. And I just wonder whether anybody had any suggestions or recommendations, or whether that's something we could be pointed to at a later point in time.
I know what you mean here, Joe. I know what you mean, because as we were saying, a lot of this is being written in real time. Many of the things that we're all talking about, even as you're saying it, I'm thinking, I'm literally writing down, training for staff. Because the fact is, I am never going to be there. I'm never going to be able to access the amount of information needed to I guess educate one staff member. And the other thing is that you kind of You need some stuff to happen in the first place so that you can talk with conviction about what not to do and what to do and what the person needs to think about before they do something. So that's the thing. Whereas, you know, with the rest of the music industry and things that you do within it, I mean, there's studio technique, what you do, there's all of these things. They're not just learned in the last 2 years. These things are learned 30, 40 years. But it's interesting, you know, we're pushing, you know, music, and we're selling music, and we're doing it through this channel that is so new. So just to almost agree with you, yeah, the importance of it, the importance of training within it, how, and please, if you've got some emails, numbers, but I mean, because a lot of what we do, especially in the MMF, is sit around the table and go, okay, what's your artist been through? What have you been through? What have you, and then basically you just collate, and you know, that's it.
Thank you. I would love for us to continue this specific conversation, but in the interest of time, we are going to move on to the next discussion point. What we're going to do is hear from just a couple of people on this one, then move on to AI, and then we're going to open up to questions, just so that everybody gets a moment. On discussion point 2, this is there such thing as ethical social media advertising? How do we do paid social responsibly? And I think this comes back to the conversation of, you know, is it about taking a bold stance and, you know, not participating in those major players who dominate the paid social space like Meta, TikTok, but is that really a viable option? It doesn't feel like one. So what does that look like? And just so that we get to hear from everybody today, I'd love to just start off with Jo Burnham, if you're happy to share your thoughts on this.
Sure, thank you. And just amazing to hear from everyone so far. Loads of things that I've been writing down and scribbling away. So thank you, everyone. This question, I really love it because it's one that I don't think we're usually allowed to ask. And I want to take a moment just to acknowledge the pressure that I think so many of us in the sector are under to be enthusiastic about social media all the time. And sometimes that can prevent really important conversations. You know, I suspect if you're earlier in your career, you've probably had to memorize a sentence which sounds something like, I'm really passionate about social media storytelling and finding audiences. And you've kind of had to learn to say that. And I think a lot of people, maybe more senior, have also had to learn to say something similar because they don't want to seem out of touch with the tech and they don't want to go against it. So I sort of just want to take a moment and acknowledge, actually, it's quite taboo in a weird way to talk about this and to talk about the ethics of it. And we try and not go there. Like, we really try not to go there. And when I see that happening a bit, oh, I really want to go there. I really want to go there. But what I would just say, and you know, I'll share my view in a second, but my main feeling is that we should actually start creating real spaces in our own organizations where these conversations can happen, because I don't think they do. I think a lot of the time we all tell each other how good everything's going and how excited we are about social media. And we don't really feel safe to talk about when we really disagree with being on these platforms, or what we're doing on these platforms, or what we're inspiring on these platforms. So I don't think there should be a conversation that only happens in a room in leadership or on panels. I think there should be spaces, even if there's anonymous contributions in some way, to get people in our own organizations feeling like they can have this conversation, because they really, really should. So my own thoughts, which should be one of many and should not at all, I don't see myself as anything approaching have any authority on social media. But I do think there are important questions that we should ask, and some of them already have been brought up by other panelists here. And really, it's kind of an inherent thing that when we put our budgets into social media platforms, are we then implicitly telling people that they should spend more time on these platforms because that's where our content is? That's where they will hear from us. That's where they get the good stuff. You know, these platforms we know are designed to be habit forming. We know study after study shows that they're increasing anxiety and feelings of disconnection. I don't know if, and maybe there are people here who would hand on heart say that social media has made society a friendlier place to live or a more connected place. I think we all know the criticisms, and sometimes we are really tempted to do mental gymnastics to not think about them because we know that they're there. I think Nell's point about staff welfare is also so important and something which gets left out. You know, there are large, and this is true of large or small teams, but I think it is different for both. In a large team, you might have the training to know how to respond to negative comments. It will still be awful, but you might have the structure in place to know what to do. Whereas if you're in a smaller organization, one bad comment can become a comms panic. People can go crazy. We're not sure what to do about it. And the welfare drag on staff that has, I think, is really quite significant. I think there are lots of arguments to look at about the ethics of this, not even going into the censorship that these platforms require us as arts organizations to align to, and how they use our data, how they profile other people's data. There's a lot there which I think is really harmful, and I don't think we can really, get out of admitting. If we're going there because that's where some audiences are, then that makes sense on a pragmatic level. But I don't think I personally would say that there's ever a purely ethical way to do it. I think it's all about compromises. And that's before we even get into the idea that it is just a subset, less so in London, but I think elsewhere, it is always going to be a subset of your audience that is engaging heavily with these platforms and is seeing your content there. So yeah, that's quite a few different things there. I don't mind being the provocative one here. I think that there is a lot that we can talk about as far as mitigating those harms. I really like Sally's point as well about using it as a space to combat misinformation. And I think from my own perspective, it's about being very specific about why we use these channels, what we're using them for, and whether we're just throwing the kitchen sink and hoping that people, view it because it's attention grabbing enough. And for me, that feels like it's contributing to a problem and not really embodying the values of our sector. So that's my little ramble on that.
Thank you. No, it's so useful to hear that perspective, and I think it's right. It's great for us to be able to have these conversations here today, but it's so important for us to be able to have these conversations when it matters, when you're actually doing the work, or before you're doing the work from a top-down level. So yeah, thank you. That is great to hear. I am keen to hear from Sally and Haydn on this before we move on to the next one. Again, very conscious of time, but we're going to go right up to the wire and keep this conversation going. So yeah, Sally, it'd be great to hear your thoughts first.
I'll be really quick, I promise. Short answer is no. I don't think there is such a thing as 100% ethical social media advertising. Spoiler alert, I still do it sometimes. When deciding on whether to use them and to give money to Facebook, TikTok, and Google, my advice is to get really specific about what the social media ads will be achieving for you and for your organization, and if there are other ways to reach those same objectives. So I'll explain what I mean by using a comparison between the Society, which I work for, and Digit, the project which I work for. So we no longer do paid social media advertising for Digit. When the project launched in 2015, social media ads were used to promote our major activities, such as our events for the Year of History, Heritage and Archaeology in 2017, but we stopped them altogether in 2018. My colleague Julianne tells me that it didn't feel right to give money to these multinational technology conglomerates, but for our project, when we had other options, for example, running creative commissions, which I won't talk about in this space, but I would be happy to chat about. I've written a blog post on it at a different time. So our objective with Digit is awareness raising amongst new audiences across the whole of Scotland. And we don't think social media is necessarily the best way to do that. We're experimenting with other methods, such as the creative commissions that I've talked about, and also project work in partnership with organisations who have relationships with communities who are underrepresented in our sector, such as Jambo Radio, which is a radio station for people of African and Caribbean heritage in Scotland. So that's why we don't do it with Digit. We have used Facebook ads recently to promote specific public events run by the Society. Unlike with Digit, the Society does run its own events. Digit just promotes other people's events. And we need bums in seats to help achieve our strategic aims, for example, promoting the sharing of knowledge. This is why that we decided that in some cases, social media advertising for those events is necessary. For example, in December, we used social media ads because there was going to be filming and photography at this event, and we wanted a good size audience. Also, because I'm only working on society comms 2 days a week, it's also about making the most of my time as a resource. So if I had more time, I could take a more ethical approach to promoting our events, such as by writing press releases or blog posts or circulating physical posters, etc. But I'm only one person, I'm only working 2 days a week. So going forward, I would consider, in my personal situation, using a small amount of cash, I'm talking between like 25 and 50 quid, to run Facebook ads again when we need to drum up attendee numbers for specific events to help achieve our charitable objectives, because they have proven to be very successful. My general advice is, if you can, still don't give your money to Google, Meta, TikTok in the form of ads. If you have some decent marketing budget and there are other alternatives available to use it on. Like I said, if you want to hear about how we've run creative commissions on an absolute shoestring and they've done really well, just drop me an email and I'll happily send you my notes from a different talk I did. But if you find yourself in the society's position, make sure you're using the ads to spotlight marginalized voices in your sector, which was the case for the lecture that I mentioned back in December, to make up for some of that evilness. I'm sorry, that was a bit of
No, thank you. I'm conscious that we've reached the past mark. If anybody does need to go, completely understand. If anyone is happy to stay for an additional 5 minutes, we're keen to finish the conversation that we've started. No pressure to do so. But yeah, thank you everyone for sharing your insights so far. Let's hear, I'm really keen here if you're happy to share, Haydn, your thoughts on paid social and how that applies to the work that you've been doing with your clients.
Yeah. I want to say I'm an advocate of social media. Maybe I'm the devil. I honestly feel social media has changed so many people's lives. There's like, every tool is how you use it. Every tool is perceived and accessible how you use it. So for example, if you want to just curate your feed, you can curate your feed. You can, there's so many things you can do to mitigate against some of the quote unquote toxicity. Yes, there is toxicity, but it's changed the lives of millions of people who didn't grow up with a silver spoon, who didn't grow up in rich communities, who didn't grow up in places where they had accessibility to all of the latest art or the latest educational pieces or latest books or the latest resources. Social media, yes, there is negativity towards it, but it's a platform, a space where you can learn, where you can go out and find so much more. I would have no career if there was no such thing as social media. I work in a space now in the arts and culture sector, and I'm probably the only person who looks like me. I see very, very few people who look like me working in the arts and culture sector. So I have to go and search, and I only find these people through social media. So although I understand there can be publications, there's problems, it could be problematic, there's problematic with everything. And to include, when we think about using paid social, there's no type of marketing space where you don't have to pay for. There's none. So TV, you have to pay for it. If you want to be in a magazine, you have to pay for it. If all of those Forbes articles you see, people are paying for it. Like, there's no space where you don't pay to be to reach a wider audience. So the idea that we don't make the most of these functions is, I never understand the pushback in that sense. Now, there are ways that you should do it from a strategic standpoint that I completely agree with. So if you're looking at it from a strategic standpoint, you're saying to yourself, how does this ad take me from where I am now to a higher towards my goal in a way that makes sense of what we're trying to achieve as an organization or as a business? And that to me makes sense. You don't just do ads for the sake of doing ads. You're going to run ads to reach a goal or to help tell a story. The idea that the fatigue around storytelling, we're arts and culture organizations, that's all we do. if we work in an arts and culture organization, that's literally our job, is to storytell. So if we work at a museum, we're storytelling. If we work at a theater, we're storytelling. If we're musicians and we're making music, we're telling our own personal stories. That's literally all we're doing. It's just the way that we frame it in our minds and the way that we see it to how we go about doing that. I've come across on my feed some incredible, talented people that I would have never seen in my life if I didn't curate my feeds in the way that I did. And that can be for anything from music to football players to poets to genius kids. Like I wouldn't be privy to any of this if it wasn't for the accessibility that social media has allowed. So from a standpoint of how do you do it socially, ethically, I don't think there is a way for you to not pay these organizations. But like I said, there's never ever been a way for you to get free marketing or reach free audiences in history. In fact, social media was probably the first one to allow you to do that when they started organic. And then when they had to decide to turn it into a business, that's why it then became more so that you had to pay for it. But if you're creating great content and you're really thinking about your audiences, then you will get organic reach. That is a fact. It's just time consuming. So you have to balance it out to say, do I have the time? Do I have the skill set in house? And do I have the creativity to really dedicate to making this a space? If you're a large organization and you have a name, then you're going to automatically drive people to your account because you're a large organization. So just because you're a known established place, you'll have a look. Smaller organizations, if you're trying to build your social strategy, think about how paid can amplify your key messages, can amplify the stories that you want to get across to build a community so that you can then step away from it. And then if you really don't want to use paid social, start to think about how you start to take people off of social towards your website, towards your newsletters, towards other spaces that you can have more control over the audiences. But you have to think about it from a strategic standpoint and think about it over the long term. And there's my little rant, so I'm done.
No, I love it. Thank you. What I love about these conversations is that there's always two sides of the coin. And I think it's really important that we hear both in terms of like your perspective of kind of, just paraphrasing, I'm not putting words into your mouth, but kind of like almost it's a responsibility to be there and to break through to those audiences that you otherwise might not be able to without those platforms. And so I think that's what's so interesting about, ethical use of paid social looks so different to everyone else. And how do we mitigate that as an organization, as an individual? So thank you, really interesting insight. We are going to finish with a discussion of artificial intelligence. We couldn't talk about ethics in digital without touching on this topic. And we're going to just hear from a couple of our panelists here because we're aware that I'm sure, we've still got some great numbers in terms of participants here, so thank you, but I'm sure that everybody, including our panelists, have other things to go on to. So yeah, finally, how can we keep up with AI and changing technologies, and what can we do to make sure that we're responsible social media citizens in this evolving landscape? There are so many kind of, ethical, moral conversations to be had around AI, but there's also a lot of conversations to be had around what it can do for digital marketing. So I think it would be remiss of us to not hand over to Jo Burnham here. Knowing your experience in this sector, I'm really keen to hear your thoughts on this.
Sure, thank you. And mostly my experience is listening to people who are playing with these tools and kind of seeing what's happening and learning myself about where things seem to be going. And before I get into other stuff with AI, I think the next 3 or 5 years, AI with social media is going to have to change how every single person is using social media. There's about to be a flood of content and video and synthetic stuff, the likes of which we've never seen, that are going to be totally overwhelming. And unless we are very ready for that, we're going to get drowned out quite quickly. That's a bit of a doom and gloom, but just to put it in the conversation, the AI's effect on social media is going to be huge. And I think that's one of the reasons why kind of understanding it is going to be really helpful. So when we talk about AI, I think we need to draw a distinction between keeping up with our understanding of it and keeping up with whether or not we choose to implement it in our work. Because whether you choose to implement more AI or not, and I say more AI because if you use grammar check, you're using AI already, is we should develop a baseline of understanding about the tools. Because even if we choose not to use them, it at least will increase our ability to spot when these things are happening unethically and be able to argue against them being used as much as knowing when there's a good opportunity to use them. So I think seeing AI education as part of our professional development is an important step. It's not to say that we should jump on it because it's trendy and we want to keep up and we're kind of excited. If anything, rushing to implement the newest technology is often a terrible idea, and I don't think it's always a very good thing to do. But also sitting back and waiting until a best practice, whatever that is, emerges also isn't a great idea, because then you get left out of the conversation. And then the best practice will probably be what the larger companies have decided to sell you as the best practice. I don't think that we should be left out of this conversation either. So part of what I see about this as the best way to learn is to actually use the tools yourself, not necessarily in your professional work now, but on a personal basis. Start trying different things out, start learning firsthand. Every time you read about AI, you're reading about it through the lens of someone else's perspective or someone else's motivations. It's really useful to cut that out and instead put yourself to play with some of these tools, to let go of the fear of touching the keyboard, but to actually start giving yourself permission to be playful, to be silly, to be naughty, to kind of break them a little bit, to see what they can do and take them a bit less seriously, because I think that's how you learn a lot faster. And again, whether or not you ever want to use them or you think they're pure evil, learning about them is still going to be helpful, and I think is the best way that we can approach any of this. So I'm not going to go on about this for ages because I know we're short on time. I want to hear from other people too. But one thing I would say, there's a link that we're going to circulate, which is a website called futuretools.io. That's a website that has thousands of different AI tools. You can filter them by what's free, by what's new, by user reviews. It's a really fun way to hop in to try a few different things out. And I would really encourage you to build a place in your organization, even if it's a Teams chat, where you can post results informally, you can have relaxed conversations, you can be really silly, and you can use that as a way to bounce ideas off each other. So yeah, my overall thing is take a deep breath, just play with some tools, try not to think about the end of the world, and then eventually the right way to use them for you will emerge. And until then, just be kind to yourself and try not to feel too much pressure, because it will be okay. We're all in this together.
Thank you. Thank you. We've gone on a full AI journey there and ended with some reassurance, which is always very helpful when we're talking about this topic that can feel quite intimidating. I'd love just on AI, just two kind of closing remarks. If Joe Taylor, if you have a sentence or two to share on this, and Kwame, if you do as well, and then we will draw the session to a close. So I really appreciate everyone's extra time today. Joe Taylor, how about yourself next?
Cool. Yes, I'll be very brief because I utterly agree with everything Joe just said. And in support of what she's just said, the thing I would add is something that I've observed from various conversations about AI, which is a sort of fear or reticence to have a go and use them personally in play. And the observation I have made, and I've mentioned this before on a panel, is that it seems to me that the younger people in these conversations have slightly more intrepidation and fear of AI than, I'm going to count myself as an older one, despite the fact I feel so young. And I believe this is because I have lived through seismic shifts in technology before, and I've lived to tell the tale. We thought the whole world was going mental several times. I mean, the cash points did not close down at the millennium or whatever else was about to happen. Email has happened, social media has happened. We're navigating it. We're not sure. It's complicated. We're not sophisticated enough. There's all sorts of worries. But I feel like I can say from an old person's perspective, it will be okay. Do what Joe just said. Have a play, use it yourself, have a go. You're not going to burn the house down. Yeah, that's all I have to add, really.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So I'm going to move on to some very quick housekeeping, and then we're going to end with some closing remarks from all of our panel speakers today. So in the chat, we're not going to pause to do this just because of everybody's time. Meg has shared the survey link. If you attended today, we'd love if you could spend just a couple of minutes filling this out, giving us some feedback on how we run these sessions. So yeah, thank you. Please take your time to do that after this. I also wanted to let you know about some of our upcoming webinars. We've got, as I said at the beginning, our full program of monthly webinars on the website now. February, we're looking at AI, which feels very relevant. So work smarter, not harder, AI in digital marketing and the arts. In March, we're going to be looking at how to improve your website's return on investment. And in April, we're going to be looking at going viral and the psychology of trends. So please head to our website and sign up to any that are of interest. We also have a quarterly newsletter that we send every 3 months, and that features marketing tips and insights, industry and project updates from HDK, and of course, some information on these webinars. And you can find the links to all of that in the chat, including anything that our panel guests have mentioned today. So with that, I wanted to ask for a closing remark from each of our panel speakers. So if you could summarize in a sentence, which I know is hard because we've had a lot to say about this today, you know, what does it mean to be responsible and ethical on social media? I'm going to hand over to you just based on who I can see first. Joe Burnham, what would your kind of closing remark on this be?
Yeah, sure. I think it just comes back to the human, really. I think the humans in our team, the humans that we're talking to, and recognizing the humanity in this work and giving opportunities for people to express when they feel sadness, express when they disagree with what we're doing, and just to kind of uncorporify our approach to social media whenever we can, and just to give ourselves a chance to really open up these conversations and have them in our teams rather than wait for, you know, leadership or a panel to have them. I think we need to talk about this in a free and open way in our own organizations, while recognizing that there is a lot of pressure to be positive, and I'm all for positivity, but I don't necessarily think it's always the best for our souls to always have to be so positive. So that's my closing bit.
Thank you. 100%. We have to be able to kind of let off that steam every now and then. Amazing. And Haydn, what would your kind of closing remark be here?
I think it's about social media is a tool, and it can be as good or evil as you so choose to make it. I do believe that we have to move with times, and that there will always be something new for us to move on to as a species, as a race, as humans in general, and therefore we go with the culture where it fits with us ethically and morally.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And Sally, how about yourself?
I would say that social media is one piece of the marketing puzzle. It's not the entire jigsaw. It is a crucial piece, and I personally will still continue to use it. But I think it works best when it works in conjunction with other approaches in a strategy.
Amazing. Thank you very much. And Nell, how about yourself?
I think one thing I'll take away from this session definitely is just not to be afraid to ask difficult questions, and just kind of put that to your organizations, put that to your colleagues in the sector. And really, I think maybe part of our jobs as social media professionals, or whatever one, you know, the different roles we all have, is just trying to keep perspective for our organizations, the people we work with. We've talked about a comment sending people off into titties. That happens at big organizations as well. So really just trying to be the voice of reason and keep you know, a measured response to the stuff. Joe Taylor and Joe Burnham, both excellent points on AI. I'm sure that will be the next shiny thing that we all get questioned about. So really just trying to make sure we're moving slowly and not rushing into things. And as Joe Burnham said, just, you know, keeping a human approach. Yeah, thank you.
100%. Thank you so much. Kwame, I'd love to hear your final thoughts.
Keep learning. Don't be scared. And just remember that very rarely does one person have a grip on it all, because there's so much out there. And that's it.
I love it. Thank you. This is all. I think this is such a nice way to for us to close. And Joe Taylor, what would your kind of closing remarks be?
Yeah, similar. I agree with what Joe Burnham says about being human, and I think with everything we've talked about, I also want to urge us to remember to be ethical is to put our audience's needs at the heart of what we're doing. So to understand our audiences better and to use these tools to get to know them and understand them. But if our product is ethical and we're benefiting the people that we're talking to and engaging with, and we're being honest and genuine, and we're not using manipulation, and we're considering the needs of our audiences, then I think we can do a lot worse. Sorry, I'm a relentless optimist. Everybody else wants me to be daring and ask difficult questions. I find it very hard, but I valued the provocations today. Thank you.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. Yes, I think you know what I've certainly gained from everyone's insights today is that it's so important to consider these conversations in your day-to-day work, while at the same time taking that human approach and acknowledging that everyone's human, from the organizational side through to the audience side, and that's really what it comes down to. So yeah, thank you everybody so much. Thank you especially to our wonderful panel speakers today. Thank you to our lovely audience and for your participation throughout. We were hoping to open up for some questions today, but just the nature of these things, we haven't had time, but I've been able to see throughout the chat that people have been really positively engaging. So thank you so much. And yeah, all I want to say is a final and millionth thank you to our panel speakers for sharing their time with us, being generous and giving us some extra minutes towards the end as well. So thank you. We are going to keep the Zoom open for a couple of minutes, but we're going to turn off our camera